Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Fabrice Veron, the Dean of the College of Earth, Ocean, and Environment, and I'm absolutely thrilled to welcome all of you to this special opportunity to hear from one of our distinguished alumni today, Dr. Danielle Haulsee. Danielle is the Chief Science Officer at the Hubbs-SeaWorld Research Institute, and she's going to share today with us some of her exciting work and field experiences, and also a few words about her career trajectory. For the students today in the audience, take note. Think about the coursework, the lab, the field experiences that can help you move towards your dream. Ask Dr. Haulsee questions and talk with your professors so we can help you to reach new frontiers in science exploration. I also want to extend a special welcome to Pat and Charles Robertson to today's event. Pat and Charles have been longtime friends of the School of Marine Science and Policy and champions of our professors and our students like Dr. Haulsee. To recognize the Robertsons' commitment to the University of Delaware, to the School of Marine Science and Policy, and to future marine science and exploration, it is my pleasure to introduce President Dennis Assanis.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Fabrice, and thank you for joining Eleni and me to this incredibly nice celebration. This event would not have been possible without the extraordinary generosity of Pat and Patricia and Charles Robertson. Thank you very much. At UD, At UD, and especially within our College of Earth, Ocean, and Environment, the Robertsons' generosity is very well known. Among other vital initiatives, their gift to establish the Patricia and Charles Robertson Distinguished Professor of Marine Science and Policy has been truly transformative, and you see the live example right here. With their support, Professor Matthew Oliver has achieved field-defining breakthroughs in oceanography and mentored dozens of undergraduates and graduate students, and you see one more there. And today, we are thrilled to announce the latest chapter of the Robertsons' incredible impact. Through their commitment of $5 million to establish the Patricia and Charles Robertson Endowment for the School of Marine Science and Policy. Yes, $5 million. This vital fund will support up to 10 graduate researchers in marine science and policy each year in perpetuity, which is a very long time, forever. So, thank you. It is hard to overstate the impact of this transformative fund and what it'll do for our graduate researchers and students, from stipends to research fellowships, to travel, to equipment, and many other research expenses. The Robertson Endowment will meaningfully advance our graduate researchers' efforts to address climate change and other pressing societal issues. For many years now, the Robertsons' generosity has been a powerful reminder of what's possible when our community comes together. And I have to tell you that Eleni and I met the Robertsons before I was actually inaugurated as president. You know, we met them in the spring of 2016, thanks to the great introduction from the then interim president, Nancy Target. And let's give her a hand too, because she has done a lot for this. So this latest gift reaffirms those possibilities at a whole new level. Every day, our students and faculty are achieving incredible things, but we could not do it alone. In every sector, every state, and throughout the world, Blue Hands are creating transformative changes. But it all begins here with philanthropic support. Earlier today, Trustee John Cochran and I presented Pat and Charles with the University of Delaware Medal of Distinction, and they're now proudly wearing them. So again, let's give them a hand for this. It is our privilege to be able to recognize exemplary individuals with one of UD's highest honors. And for those of you who are not familiar with this honor, the medal is reserved for those who have, number one, made humanitarian, cultural, intellectual, or scientific contributions to society, or number two, achieved noteworthy successes in their chosen profession, or number three, given significant service to the community. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very proud to say that Pat and Charles certainly embody all three of the criteria, don't they? They're truly amazing people, and we are extremely proud to recognize you and certainly recognize Patricia as an alum and her loyal husband and supporter and engineer, Charles, who has done so much with her and together. So please join me in giving one more round of applause to Patricia and Charles Robertson. Thank you.
Thank you, President Sanis. Pat and Charles, one more time, I want to thank you for this generous gift in supporting the School of Marine Science and Policy. The impact on graduate research opportunities here at UD and on marine exploration cannot be overstated. Your gift is truly game-changing. You've already changed the lives of many graduate students. And with this gift, you will set countless future scientists on the path to success, give them opportunities to explore the natural world, accelerate scientific discoveries, and encourage innovation to tackle some of our biggest global challenges. Your close collaboration with Dr. Matt Oliver and his students in the Orb Lab is well known and well established and so appreciated. So I'd like to welcome Matt now to say a few words.
Well, good evening, afternoon, I guess, everyone. Thank you all for joining us tonight, this afternoon, to celebrate the generosity and vision of two extraordinary individuals, Pat and Charles Robertson. So marine science is a demanding place-based discipline that requires students to master an incredible breadth of knowledge. Tackle global challenges facing our oceans, today's students must excel in mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, policy, and importantly, technology. It is a field that demands not only intellectual curiosity, but also resilience, innovation, and profound dedication to stewardship. We only have one ocean. Pat and Charles understood the unique challenges and the immense potential of this field, and this afternoon we're here to honor their most remarkable gift yet. The Visionary Endowment will fund 10 graduate students each year, empowering them with the resources they need to pursue solutions for the most pressing issues that we have in our oceans. Now, many of you know graduate students are the heart and soul of research. They are the ones braving the elements in the field, analyzing the data into the night, and asking bold questions that drive discovery. And yet their journey is often fraught with challenges, especially when it comes to securing funding. Thanks to Pat and Charles, those challenges will be fewer and the opportunities greater. This latest gift reflects Pat and Charles' deep and sustained commitment to marine science and policy. And over the years, their generosity has fueled innovation in numerous ways, from supporting cutting-edge research in the Antarctic with Apex floats, pioneering shark tagging, which you'll hear about in just a moment, advancing acoustic telemetry on gliders, and also very recent collaborations with NASA Langley, pushing ocean optics into new places in the ocean. One of those students is here tonight with us, Dr. Danielle Haulsee, and I'm very proud of her. It's hard for me I get warm fuzzies when I start talking about my students, but she is a shining example of what happens when talent meets opportunity. As a past beneficiary of Pat and Charles' support, actually the first student that they supported in my lab, she exemplifies the impact of their generosity and the impact that they can have on a young scientist's career. She earned her PhD in 2017 and then completed postdoctoral work at Stanford University, where she continued her cutting-edge research in marine science and conservation, but she is now the Chief Science Officer of the Hubbs Research Institute, where she leads groundbreaking efforts in marine conservation. Her work not only advances our understanding of ocean ecosystems, but also embodies the very spirit of innovation and stewardship that Pat and Charles have long championed. Dr. Haulsee's journey reminds us why tonight's celebration is so important. Pat and Charles' investment is not just about funding, it's about belief. Belief in the potential of young scientists, belief in the power of education, and belief in the idea that together we can solve some of our greatest challenges facing our oceans. Pat and Charles, your generosity is transformative. You have enriched the lives of countless students and have also ensured that the legacy of your vision will echo for generations to come. On behalf of the School of Marine Science and Policy, our students and faculty, and the many communities that will benefit from your gift, thank you very much. Now, it is my privilege to introduce someone who can speak firsthand about the impact that Pat and Charles have had. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Danielle Haulsee, Chief Science Officer of Hubbs-SeaWorld Research, and the proud beneficiary of Pat and Charles' commitment to the empowering the next generation of marine science. Thank you. Danielle, will you come up?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Matt, for those kind words. I'm excited to be here. I was just remembering that I haven't been back to Delaware since I moved to do my postdoc in 2018. So it's lovely to be back here at my alma mater. And I'm honored to have been invited to return to the university and share with you some highlights from my graduate student research to show that supporting graduate research can not only make a meaningful impact on our world, but also the lives of the next generation of marine scientists. So when reflecting on the support of Pat and Charles Robertson on my career and the careers of many students that came through the university after, I found a quote that I really believe speaks to their impact. Marie Curie, an incredible scientist who made a lasting impact on her field, is quoted having said, "You cannot hope to build a better world without improving individuals. To that end, each of us must work for our own improvement and at the same time share a general responsibility for all humanity, our particular duty being to aid those to whom we think we can be most useful." So during my lecture today, I want to share with you my story and how the support of a few outstanding mentors and the faith and support of the Robertsons charted a path for me to hopefully be useful in building a better world. My career as a scientist began early. I was recently reminded by my mother that at age 11, I was already working with the New Hampshire Sea Grant Extension Office as a certified water quality monitor, volunteering after school regularly to measure the water temperature and oxygen concentrations of Little Harbor Estuary, which was adjacent to my elementary school playground. At the same time, I was actively riding horses and competing in horse shows and admired the equine vets that would come and take care of the sick and injured horses around the barn. I remember one time holding a horse for a vet and watching him stitch up a cut on a horse's leg and thinking, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be a horse vet. Fast forward to my undergraduate schooling and the reality of what vet school entailed setting in, and after actually experiencing a few years of food insecurity in my own life, I ended up studying environmental science, and I became really interested in where food comes from. I led a crew of students maintaining an organic garden on campus where we grew and then donated food and fresh produce back to local food banks. While that work was fulfilling and meaningful, I decided that I didn't want to go into agricultural research because it was too complicated. There were conflicts over water rights, commercial monoculture running rampant, big runoff pollution issues affecting our water quality, and I just felt that those were wicked problems that seemed too big to solve. You'll come to find out that I study fisheries, which are just as complicated, and so I really didn't get away from these issues. But anyways, I realized that I was really passionate about our oceans and really the mysteries that still remain related to how our oceans work and how animals have adapted to live in these dynamic habitats. So between my junior and senior year at Gettysburg College, I worked on my first project actually studying animal movement and behavior, analyzing the clumping behavior of blue mussels in the bottom of buckets exposed to different water treatments. This is where I worked with one of my first truly impactful mentors, Dr. John Comito. Doc, as we called him, is a brilliant old school ecologist, the heart of gold. And during my senior year, when I was trying to figure out what I was going to do after I graduated, he said, "Why don't you go out to grad school and get your PhD?" And I remember saying to him, I could never lead a research lab. I just want to keep my head down and and contribute to research projects. So we compromised, and I went on to apply for master's programs in marine ecology and oceanography, following my passion for mapping our natural world as a tool for understanding its complexities. So I joined the University of Delaware's College of Earth, Ocean, and Environment and quickly realized that I had found my next academic home and mentor. I was entranced and inspired by Dr. Oliver's ability to communicate the complexities of a dynamic ocean and its impact on the biology in really simple terms. Matt is a brilliant scientist and pushed me to think deeply about the interconnectedness of life in our oceans. He also armed me with a passion for technology and a toolbox of analytical skills that I've carried with me throughout my career. Early in my time at the university, we connected with Pat and Charles during a tour of the Marine Station in Lewis, and we were offered the opportunity to develop a project that might be viewed as too risky, but that had the potential to make an impactful contribution in the field. This charge went on to shape what became my PhD dissertation. While working on my dissertation and learning about the complex dynamics of the ocean, I thought a lot about my time as an environmental studies major, focusing on terrestrial conservation and resource management. I've always been fascinated by animal movement and behavior, from the clumping behavior of a dozen blue mussels in the bottom of a bucket to the mass migrations of wildebeest and zebra across the Serengeti. I think it's really fascinating to think about how animals are constantly weighing external cues from their environment with internal cues related to where they're at in their life history and what they're supposed to be doing. And that these decisions that they're making influence where and when they're moving, resulting in really amazing displays of coordinated animal movement. As human development and resource use on land has increased, we've also increased our efforts to protect these amazing natural phenomena. You see, on land, we have the advantage that these animals are relatively easy to track and observe. We can figure out kind of the extent of their home range of these animals, and we can create parks and management areas to protect and conserve the mass migrations or the population centers that we care about. In essence, we wrap their home range up in a box, and we observe the migration unfolding within it, with animals responding to seasonally available food and water resources. But I think that we sometimes forget that similar animal behaviors are happening beneath the surface of the water. It's just not as apparent to us because we can't hold our breath for longer than a few minutes to see them doing this. So when we dive down, we can observe similar mass migrations happening in our oceans. For example, every year, millions of fish and sharks, like the beautiful sand tiger sharks that you see pictured here, migrate along the eastern seaboard of the US, following seasonally available food and ideal habitat conditions. In our oceans, we've tried to transfer how we manage terrestrial ecosystems to the marine realm. For example, the white outline on the map that you see here shows the mid-Atlantic shark area, which is an area of seasonally closed off for bottom longline fishing to protect migrating sharks in the area. The points that you see represent the locations of tagged sand tiger sharks, and you see there's only a handful of black points, which represent sand tiger shark presences when the protected area was active. This closure is active for 7 months of the year, and you can see that it's still doing very little to protect at least this species traveling through the area. Now, this is just a small example, but we're finding more and more that the fundamental tools that we use to manage and protect our natural resources on land, like parks and static protected areas, aren't working as well as we would hope in the ocean. And this simply comes down to some fundamental differences in life in water versus on land. In the ocean, everything from the nutrient availability to primary productivity to the home ranges of these animals is in constant flux due to the dynamic nature of life in water versus on land. On land, these things are much static, and so these static management areas work a little bit better. So therefore, new management approaches are being developed that leverage advances in technology and our improved understanding of the relationships between the ocean and the animals that live there. Dynamic ocean management is an adaptive approach that uses near real-time data to inform the spatial and temporal distribution of management or conservation actions, and has been a foundational theme of my research career. Dynamic management requires a few key components to work, and my research is really focused on using technology and stakeholder input to collect the biological and environmental information necessary to move towards a more dynamic conservation and resource management for our oceans. The first case study that I want to share with you today brings us back to my beloved sand tiger sharks. These are a large coastal shark that are found along the US East Coast, South America, South Africa, and Australia. When I was working on my PhD here at the University of Delaware, I reported that the global population of sand tigers was listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. Since that time, their status has been upgraded to critically endangered. Historically, these sharks were understudied, and therefore much of my research at the university was dedicated to describing and analyzing their occurrence, their behavior, and their habitat selectivity. To do this, I used acoustic telemetry. Acoustic telemetry is a tracking technology that consists of two parts: a receiver station and that's attached to a mooring in the coastal ocean, and a transmitter that's attached to or implanted in the animal that you're trying to study. In this case, our very cooperative sand tiger sharks. These tags allow us to follow the sharks as they swim near the receiver moorings throughout the year. For example, in this animation, the black dots that appear are sand tigers detected within the Delaware Bay, with the colored pixels representing the seasonally changing ocean temperatures. So you can see the water is very cold right now, and as it starts to warm up in the spring, you'll start to see black dots of these sharks arriving into our area. They spend the summertime vacationing in the Delaware Bay, and then as the waters begin to cool off again in the fall, they will leave. But to get these tags in sharks and collect acoustic telemetry data, many days on the boat, on the water, are required. And so the next mentor that I'd like to highlight was really instrumental in shaping me as a field researcher. Dr. Dwayne Fox from Delaware State University served as my informal co-mentor during my PhD and very quickly taught me how to read the water and track down these sharks that we were trying to catch and tag, how to fish for and safely handle sharks, to the point where I was captaining my own boat with interns fishing for sand tigers in the Delaware Bay at the end of my field work. And he taught me how to perform tagging surgeries leaning over the side of a boat. With the tags deployed, I set out to try and tease apart what was influencing where sand tigers occur. So in essence, I wanted to figure out what are the external and internal drivers that are impacting where sand tigers were going at different times of the year. To start chipping away at this question, and with support from the Robertsons, our team worked with the acoustic telemetry manufacturer and the manufacturer of an autonomous underwater vehicle to combine an acoustic receiver into an ocean-going robot that we call a glider. We named our glider Otis, which stands for the Oceanographic Telemetry Identification Sensor, and Otis was the first of its kind to not only be able to measure the environmental properties of the water column, but also record detections of any animals carrying an acoustic tag. Gliders are buoyancy-driven vehicles, meaning that they don't use a propeller to move, but instead use pumps to change their density in the water column. They fly through the ocean in a seesaw pattern, collecting oceanographic profiles of the environmental conditions, and in this case, also collecting detections of any tagged animals that they may fly near. That information is then transmitted to a glider man or woman at a computer, and we can send back changes to the mission or send it new instructions. So during our first mission with Otis, we weren't sure if we were going to detect any tagged animals at all. We knew that we had a limited window during the fall migration to detect sand tigers as they left the Delaware Bay and headed south, but it's a big ocean out there, and the glider needed to be within about a half a kilometer of a tagged animal to be able to detect it. So we were really beyond excited when the first detections started popping up, and during a 2.5-week mission, we detected multiple tagged sand tigers as they made their migration south along the coastal ocean. Here's what the environmental data looks like coming from a glider. These profiles show the conditions of the water column with water temperature at the top, followed by salinity, color-dissolved organic matter, chlorophyll, oxygen concentrations, and then distance from shore at the bottom. So these gliders really provide a detailed look at what is going on in the ocean where we're detecting these animals. Now revealing the rest of the mission, the white vertical dashed lines indicate where sand tigers were detected. And we used this information to compare the environmental conditions where sand tigers were detected versus where they weren't, to publish a paper that was really the first of its kind, showing how habitat selectivity for sharks could be measured by a glider with integrated acoustic receivers. Tracking robots like this connected me to another piece of my childhood. The photo shown here is from a stack of photos that I found a few years ago from my grandfather's time in the Navy. And I don't know if he was working directly with this underwater robot or simply fascinated with the technology like I am, but my grandfather was my idol when I was a young girl. He taught me how to fish and how to build computer boards while he told me stories about his travels around the world. And I'd like to think that a bit of my technical savvy comes from him, and my experience working with robots has really afforded me the opportunity to travel all over the world like him. From mapping prey fields in a naval sounding range off of the Channel Islands to piloting a glider and other underwater robots off the Nansen Ice Shelf in Antarctica, to studying the oceanography at the White Shark Cafe in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and even deployments here in the Mid-Atlantic, testing new sensors with Pat and Charles out on the boat with us. But back to my sharks, the information that we gained using the glider to measure the habitat selectivity of sand tigers was really instrumental in informing the next stage of the research, which was to use what we learned about the relationship that these sharks had with environmental conditions to build predictive habitat models from satellite data now. And in this animation that you see, hopefully, playing here, the model is cycling through an example year and showing areas in warm colors where sand tigers are predicted to occur throughout the year. You can see this seasonal wave in their occurrence in our area and their tight relationship with the coastal oceans in the region. The research that came out of these two projects had direct applications for conservation and management and served as the basis of NOAA's designation of the Delaware Bay and surrounding coastal ocean as essential fish habitat and habitat areas of particular concern for sand tigers. And we really love when the research that we do is actually applied to make positive changes. In addition to establishing a general model to predict the occurrence of sand tigers in the region, the scope of the tagging work that was facilitated by the Robertson support was large enough that we had a sample size to build a sample size adequate to make models specific for each life history stage and the different sexes of the sharks. So here I'm showing an example of the model predictions for juveniles in green, mature sharks in orange, and the overlap of both juvenile and mature sharks in purple. And you can see that there's times of the year and certain areas where only juveniles exist, and then certain times of the year when only mature sharks are found, and then certain times of the year when everybody's hanging out together. Understanding this separation of by life history stage and by sex is really important for targeted conservation and management decisions. For example, mature female sand tigers only produce 2 pups every other year, which means that their populations are really slow to rebound after disturbances. Therefore, it's really important to understand where pregnant females are occurring so that we can better protect them, or where pup nursery grounds are so that we can protect those. And thereby, we can protect these critical life history stages and subpopulations to give sand tigers the best chance of rebuilding and sustaining healthy populations moving forward. Now, I want to bring us back to this picture because it's a great illustration of another interesting behavior that sand tigers have. We knew from our tagging work in the Delaware Bay that sand tigers often seem to be concentrated in groups, and we know from underwater photographs, forward, like this one off of North Carolina, that sand tigers often form these huge schools of sharks. But we didn't know if the groups were consistent over time or if there were any kind of variability in the patterns of this grouping behavior. So to investigate the internal drivers of movement and how schooling behavior varied over time, we schemed up a plan for our next high-risk, high-reward project. This project, again, was based on acoustic telemetry, but this time, in addition to the tags communicating to the moored receivers, we also implanted a new tag in 20 lucky sharks called a VMT, or VEMCO Mobile Transceiver. Transceivers are a mix of a transmitter and a receiver in one, meaning that sharks carrying VMTs became mobile acoustic receivers themselves. It's important to note that these tags are archival, meaning that if you put a tag in a shark and you let it go for a year and you let it perform its annual migration and you want to get that data back, you have to convince that shark to let you recapture it the next year if it decides to come back at all. There goes the risk part of this project. So, it was a high-risk project, high reward, but this project is where I really got to fulfill my dreams of being an animal vet. Although my patients were sleepy sharks instead of horses, but that's okay. Working with veterinarians from the Georgia Aquarium, we developed a tag implantation technique that tethered these VMTs to the inside of the body wall of sand tigers so that the following year, when we recaptured those sharks, we would be able to extract the tags from the sharks, suture them back up, and release them, send them on their way, thanking them for their participation in the study, and offloading the data from the tags. After a lot of time chasing sharks, we eventually did recapture 2 of these sharks. Here you can see the healed scar from the tag implantation, which helped us locate where the VMTs were still inside the sharks a year later. We recovered the VMTs from 2 males who I'll call Bill and Ted, and we had no idea if this plan was going to work and if these sharks were going to detect anything as they swam from the Delaware Bay down to Florida and then back. We were thrilled when we found that each tag had detected tens of thousands of other detections from not only other tagged sand tigers, but other species as well. And from this data set, we were able to publish one of the first papers using social network analysis to study schooling behavior and the interconnectedness of aggregations of sand tigers throughout the year. So I just to break this down for you and what these graphs show us, if I zoom in on a graph for September, the black nodes in the center of these network graphs represent our data collecting sharks, Bill and Ted. These nodes on the left-hand side represent male and female sand tigers that were only detected by Bill. These are only sharks that were only detected by Ted, and then those in the middle were detected by both Bill and Ted throughout September. So you can see we created these plots throughout the year. And just to highlight some of the patterns that we found, we observed high population connectivity and mixing when the sand tigers were present in the Delaware Bay and the surrounding coastal ocean. During this time, the sharks are probably taking advantage of the abundance of prey fish in the region and preparing for their annual migration. In the fall, we observed a shift in the grouping, with sand tigers that were detected on the VMTs shifting to mostly other males around the same size as Bill and Ted. This shift to a male-dominated group supports earlier work that had been done using satellite tags on sand tigers leaving the Delaware Bay in the fall, which found that there was evidence for sexual segregation in their migratory behavior, with adult females heading offshore and east instead of following the rest of group of mostly other males south. In December, there was high overlap again in group detection, with the group being most dominated by males, but there were other females and juvenile sharks that were again coming into the mix and hanging out with Bill and Ted. During this time, which we called the bottleneck due to the constriction of habitat that occurs off of North Carolina as the continental shelf sneaks in close to shore, the sharks are known to hang around the shipwrecks that are really common in that region. This underwater footage from a scuba diver off of a shipwreck in the Outer Banks highlights really just how close these sharks are schooling when they're in this region. However, why they do this remains unknown, but it's really important to understand where are these areas where there's high population connectivity. In the late winter and early spring, we saw a completely different pattern emerge. All of a sudden, these sharks seemed to disperse, and Bill only detected a handful of other males, and Ted just went off on his own solo adventure for the month of April. He didn't detect anything. This kind of information is really helpful to help us understand where these animals are concentrated and where they're not, and what they might be doing at different times of the year. And it gives us insight into not only mixing of the population, but it allows for more informed population surveys and management efforts. And amazingly, Bill and Ted did not only encounter other tagged sand tigers through their migration, but a whole host of other tagged animals, including a ton of endangered Atlantic sturgeon and other species of sharks, some of which are protected and some of which are actively fished for. Understanding overlap in the occurrence of species in the ocean like this is really important and helps us understand what types of activities might be impacting sand tigers, or how protection measures for other protected species might have an umbrella effect and offer protection to sand tigers as well. So, considering the overlap of marine resources takes me to the last project of tracking things that I'd like to highlight today, and comes from my time working with Dr. Larry Crowder at Stanford University. Larry's lab was instrumental in helping me really think about fisheries from multiple viewpoints, but especially considering fishers' livelihoods and the impact that a changing ocean can have on local fishing communities and economies. I joined Larry's lab as a postdoc to lead a project tagging and tracking blue marlin and sailfish in the eastern tropical Pacific, specifically off of Costa Rica. And I'm purposefully introducing this project with this photo because that I took during a tagging trip to prove that it's not always bright and sunny when you're doing fieldwork in the tropics. Sometimes it's pouring rain and you're wondering what happens when your boat is struck by lightning 200 miles offshore in Central America. Nevertheless, this region is beautiful and is a real hot spot and a gem for biodiversity. The biodiversity in this ocean supports vibrant commercial and recreational fisheries, as well as incredible conservation and ecotourism efforts. However, this overlap in stakeholder interests in the marine resources found in the region often sets up a perfect storm for conflicts over what effective management means for species that are sought after by both commercial and recreational fisheries, and also valued for their important role that they serve within healthy ecosystems. In this case, we were interested in better understanding the distribution and occurrence of two highly sought after species found in the region, the blue marlin and sailfish. So to track these highly mobile predators, we used a different type of tagging technology called satellite telemetry. These tags are attached to a fish who carry them for a couple of months, collecting environmental and behavioral data. After some time, the tags are released from the animal, where they float to the surface and transmit packets of collected data to satellites, which is then sent back to us. And using some fancy models that feel honestly like magic, we're able to reconstruct where the animal is likely to have traveled while the tag was attached to the animal. During this part of my career, I took a lot of inspiration from my next mentor, Dr. Barbara Block. Barb is a pioneer in the tagging world and highly regarded by the sport fishing community for her work working with fishers to study highly sought after fish like tunas and marlins, and her foundational work on white sharks off of the coast of California. She was instrumental in helping me learn this new tagging technique, helping me to navigate the intricacies of international fieldwork. Transitioning from local fieldwork, tagging sharks and deploying gliders in the Delaware Bay, to leading an international field effort, tagging these giant fish and working with sport fishermen was a pivotal time in my career, and where I was able to apply the fieldwork skills and my adaptability that I learned from Dr. Fox, and my understanding of oceanography and my leadership and communication skills that I took from my time in Dr. Oliver's lab, and apply that to a whole new project and ecosystem. Building on the spirit of collaboration that I learned from my time as a grad student at the University of Delaware, I was able to convince a dozen or so of other researchers to contribute their historical tag data from blue marlin and sailfish that were tagged in the region to our data set of tags that we deployed off of Costa Rica to create a giant data set of billfish tagging data going back almost 2 decades. In the animation that you can see playing here, you can see the overlapping distributions and movement behavior of blue marlin and sailfish for those 2 decades. This tagging data not only allowed us to compare how these species overlapped horizontally, but also in the vertical dimension. Interestingly, we found that sailfish were commonly found deeper than blue marlin in this part of the world, which is different than where they are found in other parts of the world. Additionally, the diving behavior and how much time they're spending at depth is really useful for us to consider their susceptibility for being caught as bycatch in offshore longline fisheries, depending on whether the fisheries are shallow or deep set. Another major result of the project was really solidifying the fact that while these fish are highly migratory and they do not remain where they are tagged for very long, they're also highly concentrated in the national waters of the region, only spending less than 10% of their time in international waters. This has been really important and critical for regional resource managers to understand, because it means that for much of the year, what is happening within their national waters that are fished by local recreational and commercial fishers is likely having the largest impact on the health and sustainability of these populations. Additionally, because we were able to pull together such a large tagging data set and that goes back in time, we were able to look back and see how the population centers shifted in varying climate conditions. For example, in the El Niño Southern Oscillation, which plays a major role in changing the oceanography of the region, we were able to show that during El Niño conditions, both of these species shift inshore, while during La Niña conditions, these species shifted offshore. El Niño conditions may represent what our future oceans look like in a warming climate, and so understanding how populations shift and concentrate further inshore into coastal waters and where they're more accessible but to these local recreational and commercial fishers has really important implications for any kind of forward-looking fisheries management policies. So I want to start wrapping up by telling you about a conversation that I had with Pat Robertson at a dinner at the President's House in July of 2017. I was invited to attend as a student representative from the Orb Lab for a celebration honoring Dr. Oliver's recent endowment from the Robertsons. Sitting across from Pat, we chatted about 2 things that have struck with me ever since. First, she asked me the question that every PhD student hates: what do you want to do next? Having just wrapped up my PhD and panicking about what was next for me, I told her that I was applying for postdocs and faculty positions, as was expected for somebody kind of on this career track, but that I was still interested in finding a position outside of academia. I told her I had been in school my whole life, never taking a break, and I wanted to see if I could use my research skills and my education to make a real difference outside of an academic setting.
The second thing that she expressed to me was that she wished she could have done the type of research that I had done when she was my age, but it just wasn't something that women did then, and she was really glad to see that the world was changing. Jane Goodall is quoted saying, "What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make." While I could have made a difference in an academic setting, I meant what I said to Pat that day at dinner when I said that I had been in school my whole life and I wanted to get out there and really make a difference. So, true to that conversation, I have found a home for myself outside of academia, leading the research program of Hubbs-SeaWorld Research Institute in San Diego, California. Hubbs is an independent, nonprofit marine conservation research institute whose mission is to return to the sea some measure of the benefits derived from it. We focus on applied research projects tackling the biggest problems facing our oceans through our 4 core research programs. In this role, I have found my true calling and passion facilitating the research of our scientists and working to make impactful change to improve the sustainability of our oceans. One of our largest programs at Hubbs is our Sustainable Seafood Program, where we're seeking solutions for producing sustainable seafood to feed a growing population. Making food to feed people brings me back to my time growing vegetables for the food bank in Gettysburg and reminds me how far I've come from my own background of food insecurity and fuels my passion now to give back and to try to help others that are facing the same situation. Throughout this talk, I've shared with you stories of amazing mentors that have shaped my career and hopefully become useful. And while these mentors have all been truly outstanding, you may have noticed that all but one of them were males. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but there really is something, There really is something to be said about having diversity in research fields and for students to be able to see that anyone can contribute to these fields and that the change that Pat was proud to see happening is continuing. So, in addition to my research and carrying Pat's words in my heart, I remain passionate about working with students at all ages through outreach events, virtual classroom visits to schools across the country, and involving amazing high school, undergraduate, and graduate students in my research as much as possible, hoping that I can hopefully make a difference in inspiring the next generation of marine scientists. These efforts have really culminated this past year when I was recently recognized as a woman of impact in STEM by my local state assembly member, and in the honor that I have standing here today speaking with you and sharing my story. So I want to end by returning to the quote where we began. It is our duty to aid those to whom we think we can be most useful. I want to thank Pat and Charles again, and many of you in the audience and online for your support of myself and all of the other graduate students that will come through the program to go on and be useful. I'm excited to see the impact of your gift and honored to have been part of the legacy here at the University of Delaware. Thank you. And I believe we were going to try to do questions. Thank you.
You mentioned that these two shark, Bill and Ted, they encountered a lot of other, even other species. Are all these tagged, or you just naturally recorded the signal?
Great question. These were other species that had been tagged by other researchers. And so it was a huge collaborative effort where we detected these other tag codes. We went to the network and we said, we've detected these, are they your animals? And then they got back to me and everybody was super collaborative to let me know what those species were and where they thought that those species, like the history of where those tagged animals had been, so we could reconstruct kind of the network of the animals that were around. So these were other species that had been tagged with acoustic sensors from researchers up and down the East Coast.
Hi, Jay Bancroft. If fisheries need regulation to be sustainable, is there any hope for a simple, elegant policy for the lay public, or do we need the important role for authorities like DNREC and NOAA?
I think there is a role for DNREC and NOAA to be able to have organizations whose duty it is to go and survey these populations and kind of aggregate all of the information, and then, because that is something that I don't think we can expect the fishers who have kind of a vested interest to be able to maintain, in an unbiased way. I don't think that's fair to the public to necessarily expect them to be running population models. So I think there is a role for these organizations. One thing that I will mention, though, and with this dynamic ocean management that I talked a lot about today, is that the policy structures that we have in place are not really set up to respond in a way that is as dynamic as things are changing in the ocean from day to day, year to year, phase to phase. And so that is one thing where I think it's going to take all of us as a community, scientists, resource managers, other people who are stakeholders in the system, to really think creatively about how can we do a better job of making decisions quicker and with more confidence to be able to respond to the dynamic nature of the ocean and the changing populations. And our changing use, how we're using these resources and how we're interacting with the ocean is changing, exponentially all the time. And so being able to adapt and react to those changes is really important.
Thank you, Danielle, and congratulations on all your accomplishments, and congratulations to the Robertsons and Matt and the rest of your academic family. And I think Matt summed it up well. You're a great example of how talent and maybe preparedness meet opportunity. And I do know that I see at least a few students in here. I'm wondering if you have any advice for our undergraduate and graduate students in attendance.
Yeah, thank you. Lots of advice. I will say that while I was able to pull together, I think, a decent story of how it all made sense, why I worked on certain things while I was going through it, that was not the case. I was really flying by the seat of my pants and making decisions as they came up. And so I would say, I think it's really important to follow your curiosity. It's going to be really important to have something like that curiosity and that passion, something that you're really interested in, which will help you get through those long nights processing data or long days on the boat where you're just staring at an empty ocean, wondering if a fish is ever going to bite your hook. So I would say to hold on to those types of things. I think I talk a lot about, for any student that wants to do anything close to anything that I've done, you're going to have to learn math. I didn't tell this part of my story, but I actually went to college and I wanted to be a chemistry major, and the first semesters of chemistry in college was a lot of math, and I was like, I don't want to do this. So then I switched to environmental science, which was a lot more of just thinking about the environment, and then I went into oceanography, and all of a sudden I had to do more math than I've ever done, and a lot more computer science also. I think, with technology and all of the research that we're talking about, and especially in the ocean, the technology is really what is getting us to the next frontier of oceanographic research. And so being able to be a part of that and understanding how the data is collected and then what to do with it is something that I think is really important. So to sum that up, don't stress too much about what exactly you're gonna do. You can't, I don't know, some people have their plans all laid out, but I definitely didn't, and it's been a great journey. And then, really, really think about, if it calls to you, lean into technology and math and computer science, because that's really the direction that at least this field is going. But also, if your interests are in anything else, in science communication, that is critical. We are finding more and more that the disconnect between scientists and what is happening with the data that we're collecting, and then what that means for the general public and for society, there's a huge disconnect there. And so you can still participate in this field even if you don't love math and you don't love technology, but you're a great communicator or a great artist who can simplify the complicated data into a nice infographic that can be ingestible by and to keep the attention of everyday people. And so there's so many ways that you can participate. You just have to kind of figure out what drives your passion and will keep you going through long days behind a computer or long days on a boat.
Thank you, Danielle. That was a fabulous talk, and you're such an amazing ambassador for the University of Delaware. So thank you for all of that. I'm wondering about the SeaWorld Research Institute. How is it funded? And a follow-up on the last question, do you offer internships that our students might wish to pursue?
Yeah, great question. So we are a nonprofit research organization, and so we are funded by all the money that we can get. We apply for competitive research grants from NSF and from NOAA, just like academic institutions do. We also are funded through foundations and private donors, both individual small giving donors up to large donors who are interested in funding, bigger projects. And so that's where our funding comes from. And then the second question, internships, yes. What we have always had interns here and there, but one of the things that I did when I started at Hubbs was really try to formalize an internship program, and with an emphasis on making sure that we had stipends that we could pay the students that were going to be working with us throughout the summer. We do take interns during the school year, but that's hard for students, so we really focus our internship mentorship at Hubbs during the summer months, and we'll post positions that are available and then recruit interns to come and work with us for the summer. A lot of that is related to the aquaculture research that we're doing because it's very hands-on, and there's a lot of opportunities for students to learn hands-on. But we also take students who are interested in helping us process the data that we've already created or already collected, and I'm also really interested in recruiting interns to work with us on science communication and helping to share the science that we're doing out with the communities that we serve.
Hey Danielle, welcome back. It's wonderful to see you.
Great
it's
to
always
see
great
you, Art.
to see our blue hens come back to the nest as triumphantly as you have.
Thank you.
And I want to kind of pick up on Dr. Wozniak's question and flip it around, and that is to say, you talked about how mentors through your career have helped and shaped you, and in fact, one of them, the ever loquacious Dr. Fox texted when I sent him a photo of this, and he said, "She's a good one." He really can boil things down.
That's really amazing praise from Dr. Fox.
Yes, I call him my favorite fish squeezer.
He also hates when I call him Dr. Fox, so let's keep that going.
Let's keep doing it. So I'm wondering then, based on your experiences, how do you approach your mentorship, and what advice do you have to faculty and others in positions, in terms of how you approach that? And then how do you balance your leadership stuff and that and trying to carve out and continue your research program? I'm dying to know, when do you sleep?
That is a great question. Yeah, I would say, I approach working with students just with a lot of empathy. I think students, especially now, are juggling a lot, and I really try to talk with students. What are you interested in? Like, what do you enjoy doing? What are your hobbies? Who are you as a person? And then how can we take those interests that you have and those skills that you have and make them useful for, studying this thing that we want to study? I always have my students working, learning R, or if they already know R, working on some kind of programming thing, because I think that's useful. Even if they don't need that at that time, I think just like taking from Dr. Oliver, giving the students
a toolbox of tools that they can then apply to, maybe they don't stay in marine science, but they go on to do something, and that tool that I taught them, they'll at least have dabbled in, and then they can take that with them moving forward. So when I'm working with students, I try really hard to be approachable, to be empathetic to their, all of the things that they're trying to weigh in terms of the stresses of being in, college or in classes, and then trying to do these extracurricular things to advance them to the next stage. And then I try to really understand what their work style is and how we can adapt that into the project that we're trying to work on together. In terms of balancing the leadership position that I'm in now and my research, it's funny, I remember working with Dr. Oliver, and he'd come to the lab and just want to work with, talk to us about what we were doing and say, all I think about is budgets and paperwork. And I now empathize with that a lot. But just, I think, as much as Dr. Oliver has found a lot of inspiration and motivation to keep going through the work that he was able to facilitate with his students, I now feel that. So I am extremely proud every day of the work that all the rest of the researchers are doing at Hubbs, and my role in facilitating and making that happen for them. So I find a ton of joy in that, in trying to make things more efficient, trying to make things collaborative, trying to find opportunities and partnerships for the Institute and for my researchers, and then the students that I'm still working with. So a lot of my focus has shifted to that, but then I also really want to be a role model for not only the rest of the Institute, but also other, the students that we're working with. And so trying to maintain some research on the side that is mainly facilitated through the students that I'm still working with, but I'm still trying to participate in, because getting out on the water really makes, 12 or 11 and a half months of sitting behind a desk and working on your computer really worth it. And getting out there and seeing the systems that you're studying in real life is really important, and helps keep you grounded on the problems that you're trying to tackle. And so it is important to try to balance those things.
I have a question about the sand shark migratory patterns. Are they related to the foodstuffs? Do they change diets over different times of year?
That is a great question, actually, and we did look into that. So while we were working with the sharks on the side of the boat, we had the mind to actually take teeth samples from the sharks. So sharks are constantly growing and shedding teeth. I think most of us know that. And so when we would see one that was very loose and dangly, we would just snag that tooth and put it in a little envelope, and we didn't necessarily know what we were going to do with those teeth samples. A few years later, Dwayne Fox actually made a connection with a researcher over in Germany who was interested in studying the isotopes, the chemical composition of the teeth that we were collecting, and he was able to look at differences. And because we had so many of them, and we knew that some of them were from juveniles, some of them were from males and females, he was able to look at how the isotopic composition of the teeth was different for females, males, and for juveniles. And what that means is basically sharks you are what you eat, right? And so the isotopic compounds that are in the food that you eat is integrated into things like our bones and our teeth in sharks. And so we were able to show that there seems to be dietary differences for those different life history stages, which means that they're probably occupying different areas and feeding on different prey resources. So that's just an example of how we were able to look into that. But yeah, I think there is differences in what they're eating depending on where they are. In our area, they might be eating one thing, and when they head south and in that dispersal phase, it's likely that food is a lot more spread out down there, or the prey resources are different, and that contributes to some of their dispersal that we observed, because they're having to spread out in search for food. And so hopefully that gets at some of your question.
Yeah, I'm new. I'm a new first-year PhD student here, and I have a question. Have this method helped in fishing industry, and have there any interesting things? For example, initially, people, unlike the fishermen, they didn't believe your theory, and in the end, they actually catch some fish, so they believed you.
Oh, interesting. I would say, one of the things that kind of that question reminds me of, we did a workshop actually with fishermen over in New Jersey. I don't know if you remember this, Matt, where we were working with fishers to try to create these habitat models for fish offshore. And what we asked them was, what are the environmental variables that you think are important for where these fish are? And then we ran our models using data collected and matched to environmental variables. And we created a model and told them, these are the environmental variables that the data says are important for where the fish are. And it was so accurate to what their perspective was that they thought that we cheated. We did a similar thing in my work down in Costa Rica, where we have the data for the tagged fish, and we connected the data to the environmental variables where those tagged fish were found. We then also went to the fishers and we talked to them and we asked them, what are the environmental variables that you think are important for where the fish are? And we created models based on their perspective of the environmental relationships in the fish, and then based on our data, and we compared. And in that instance, it's interesting because their perspective is much more tied to shore, whereas the fish are going further offshore than they think. So I would say, yeah, working with fishermen is really interesting. Sometimes they're very cooperative and very interested in the science. It's something that I am really passionate about, is working with fishermen and trying to understand all of the knowledge that they know from just being out on the water all the time. But sometimes they don't necessarily believe the science because it doesn't jive up with their perspective. Their perspective is on the water on sometimes a pretty small scale, when these animals are, the population of these animals and the movements is much larger scale. And so sometimes there is a disconnect between what the fishers think and what the data shows, but oftentimes it's actually very close because they're great natural scientists themselves, just being out there in this ecosystems all the time. So hopefully that answers some of your question. Great.
Well, thank you. I want to invite you to join me in thanking Danielle one time for that fantastic presentation, and Pat and Charles for enabling the work of scientists like Dr. Haulsee. Thank you. This concludes our event today, and I feel compelled to say, be excellent to each other.
Yeah, thank you.